Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the California Academy of Sciences. We are thrilled to host you here on this Earth Day. Today we're going to have this great panel with 3 Academy scientists, and you're going to hear from them. We're going to talk to you about things that you can do for the Earth. And I'm going to talk about a few things that the Academy is working on and what regeneration means to us, etc. And for those of you who do not know me, my name is Scott Sampson. I serve as the Executive Director here at the Academy, a role that I've had for about 5.5 years. I'm trained as a dinosaur paleontologist, hence the image on the right. And for those of you who've got younger kids or grandkids, you might know me as Dr. Scott the Paleontologist from a show called Dinosaur Train on PBS. Well, I truly was the 4-year-old who fell in love with nature and dinosaurs and just never grew up. You know, like most adults kind of go, that dinosaur thing, I went through that phase. I just never grew out of it. So I want to walk you through what the Academy is doing around this idea of regeneration. And for us, regeneration has a special meaning. It basically means healing, and healing the earth in particular, but also healing the relationship between people and nature. And I'll get back to that. Oh, actually, let me, if I can here. This is our mission statement. And like any good mission statement, we fought over every one of these damn 10 words in this sentence, right? And so the first part is our purpose. We regenerate the natural world. That's why we exist. We exist to make the world healthier. That sustainability isn't enough. Net zero isn't enough. That no matter where you are on the planet, you're looking at a degraded ecosystem, and we have to create greater health in those ecosystems. So that's our purpose. The second part of the mission statement is how we plan to achieve it. 3 ingredients. Science, you got to understand any given place to regenerate it. Learning, you have to educate people so that they understand how that place works and their role within it. And collaboration. You can't just go ahead and change a community any way you want. You've got to partner with that community, key stakeholders within it, etc., to take it down a different direction. So this is what we do. Within it, we do these 2 kinds of regeneration that I mentioned. We regenerate certain places. We focus on those places. I'll get back to that in a minute. And we regenerate people, in particular, the connection between people and nature. So right now, there is a dominant worldview which says that humans are outside and above nature. Nature is resources, and it is our job to manage those resources. And I'm afraid that that viewpoint has not, it's done well to build our economy to this point, but all indicators say that it is not going to do well moving forward. That we are in overshoot. We are using 1.7 Earth's worth of resources every year, these percentage-wise. We're digging into the capital versus the interest, the natural interest. And we have to do a better job. We have to scale back humanity. We have to see ourselves as part of these ecosystems and partner with nature rather than dominate it. So our goal is to create a feedback loop between these 2 things. If we're regenerating specific places and the people in those places, then that will feed back on the places and you get basically a flywheel effect going. And that's why when we talk about regeneration, we're referring to both the places and the people. So those are the 2 kinds of regeneration. We clearly can't take on the planet, talk about boiling the ocean. We would not be able to regenerate the planet. So we said, well, where are we going to focus? We focus in 2 kinds of places. Tropical islands, both in coral reefs just offshore and on land in those islands, and in California. And that's both wild California in the Sierras, in the kelp forest just off the coast, and in the cities. In particular, we have a major focus in San Francisco. So these are the 2 places where we're doing the 2 kinds of regeneration. But there's a third ingredient that I want to talk about that comes up here. In our mission statement, we talk about science, learning, and collaboration. Well, forever, Museums have done the first two. We've done science through research, etc. We've done learning through educational programs. That's great. That third piece, though, collaboration, or as it's termed here, community engagement, that's different. Traditionally, the flow has been one way, from us to the outside world. Now we're saying that's not enough. We need to create community engagement, and we want to turn this place and other places we work into places to engage the community, to think about the future, to partner with the community on regeneration projects, to hear from the community about what a thriving future might look like. What do we need to include within that future? And then finally, I want to announce something that really is just being formally launched today that we're really excited about. We've been working on this thing for about 2 years, and it's called Regeneration Circle. And our philosophy here is that we want people to understand how their place works. That's the science part. We want people, so that the science part is creating the understanding, the learning part is sharing that understanding, and the collaboration is working out how to take action. So we want people to grow in all three of those areas, to boost their understanding and their caring about the place, and then use those two things to leverage action. And we have formed Regeneration Circle to help mobilize and grow the movement that already exists out there to make the planet healthier. And how can we do this? Well, anyone can sign up for the Regeneration Circle. It is a fundraising element, so we're asking people to give what they can. And once they sign up, our goal is to give you resources every single month that you can use to live into your values. How can you take action to do regeneration? And one of the ways you can do it, those of you who picked up the seeds, is, for example, planting native plants. Because it turns out that native plants are almost magical in their ability to regenerate the natural world. Why? Because they evolved to live in the place where they're native. And if you plant them, they will attract native insects that won't be attracted to any other plants necessarily. And those native insects will attract native birds and other animals. So you are increasing biological diversity simply by planting native plants. And even if all you have is an apartment with a window, you could put a window box there and plant those native plants, and you will be helping to regenerate the natural world. So that's just one example, but we're going to be talking about actions that people can take just to sort of understand what's happening and where they might insert themselves to make a meaningful difference in the world. And individual actions are important, but collective actions are even more important. Telling stories about your individual actions, getting other people involved, etc., is really, really important. So with that, I am going to invite my three folks up here. So can I get Rebecca Albright to come? And Rebecca, if you could please sit here. Rebecca Johnson will take the seat beside her, and Avery Hill. Avery, if you will please join us. So rather than me talking about these people, which I can do and do on a somewhat regular basis, we're going to have them talk about themselves just for a minute or two, and then I'm going to ask them some questions, and then you are going to ask them some questions. All right, are we good? So please, as we're going through this, please be thinking about the things that you would like to ask these folks so we can have a great discussion here. So we'll kick things off here with Rebecca Albright.
Hi, happy Earth Day, everybody. My name's Rebecca Albright. I'm a coral biologist, and I'm an associate curator here at the California Academy of Sciences. I've been here for about 9 years. My background, broadly speaking, is in coral reef biology and ecology. I have expertise in coral reproduction, coral biogeochemistry, And I've spent the majority of the last 20 years really trying to understand how reefs will fare in the face of global climate change. So I've looked at the impacts of warming and acidification on all different life stages, from fertilization all the way up to reef scale calcification and how the whole reef function changes. And in my role here, I mean, I will say over those 20 years, there really wasn't a good end to those stories. It's always pretty negative. Overwhelmingly, warming and acidification negatively impact reefs across all sorts of biological processes and scales. And in my time at the Academy, I have been incredibly fortunate to be able to shift my focus towards building a more solutions-focused research program, which has brought a lot of hope and optimism into my own life and the people that I work with. And so in my first time being non-proximate to a coral reef here in San Francisco, I have partnered with the Steinhardt Aquarium here in-house in order to establish and build a conservation breeding program where we actually reproduce corals in human care. And then we use that as both a scientific opportunity and a conservation opportunity. So one of the things we're focusing on at the moment is trying to develop techniques to be able to help corals, baby corals, grow and survive better in the face of environmental adversity. And then take those ideas that we develop and the techniques that we develop and port them to on-the-ground restoration partners. Right now, we're working with the Roatan Marine Park in Honduras to get those techniques on the ground in natural reef environments in order to enhance the survivability of corals in the wild.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Rebecca Johnson.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Johnson. And we always get each other's emails, so it's always fun to sit next to each other. So I direct what's called the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science here at the Academy, which is a department in our research division. And I have an awesome team of people that I work with. But I came to the Academy actually as an undergraduate intern and about 30 years ago. And so I've had the real honor of spending my entire career here. And when I first started working here, I was studying how sea slugs or nudibranchs are related to each other. They're little amazing things called nudibranchs or sea slugs. And I was really interested in just understanding the diversity of this group. And there was a moment, though, in my career where I made a shift to thinking about, instead of doing that kind of lab-based research, how I really wanted to work with people and involve people in understanding the biodiversity that's all around us and how it's changing. Because I was seeing that, we all were seeing that, we were seeing great changes in where species are found. And I knew not only was there a real opportunity to connect people to nature by getting them outside, but also that there were some fundamental science questions that we could not answer without involving people everywhere. So I made a shift into what's called community science. And now that's what we do on our team. We work to design campaigns and events for people to get out and take pictures of the plants and animals that they see and share those pictures or share those observations to help us create a picture of what species are found where, when, and how that's changing. And then there are some other folks on my team, including Avery, who take all of those data that we've collected together to help answer some really pressing questions, to do good science, and to also develop tools that are really critical for policymakers and decision makers to make decisions around nature. And it's been a real, amazing experience to make that shift. And it is a type of regeneration work, right? It's like designing opportunities for people to become more connected to nature, that human-nature connection, and also to gather the data that are needed to inform those solutions for nature. And before I pass it on to Avery, I just want to say one last thing, that I also do some work in San Francisco, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I head up an alliance of about 50 organizations and agencies in San Francisco working to make a San Francisco where people and nature thrive together.
Thanks, Rebecca. Avery Hill.
Hi, everyone. I'm Avery Hill. I am a postdoc in the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science, working under Rebecca Johnson. And I grew up in Napa County, right kind of in a forest right on the edge of redwoods and oak woodland. And from a young age, I was always interested in why plants grew where they grew and kind of what determined their kind of geographic distributions. And so I studied that in college. And then when I started my PhD, I knew I wanted to study something related to how humans were impacting species plant distributions and changing where certain plants can grow and when. But I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to study and where I was going to study it. But in the first 3 weeks of my PhD, one of the 2017 wildfires burned through the forest that I grew up in. And I spent the first couple months evacuating my grandparents that were up there, and my parents were still there, and waiting to see if the houses were still standing. And then when they were, moving them back in, and picking up the pieces of burned sheds and irrigation and things like that. And so coming out of that, I knew that I wanted to study wildfire and its impact on not only California ecosystems, but also on people and people like my family. And so in my PhD work, I ended up studying, exactly that, the impact of California, of climate change and wildfire on California ecosystems. My research showed that there are a large proportion of pine forests in the Sierra Nevada mountains are vulnerable to being replaced by oak trees and shrubs because of warming and drying conditions. We've been calling these forests, kind of for fun, zombie forests. And we think that these forests are likely to transition. The rate at which they transition will increase after recent wildfires. And so reflecting on this work, I became really interested in how we manage this, how we think about regenerating these forests and thinking about how to resist, accept, or direct change. And I came to an understanding that what was really important for understanding how to resist, accept, or direct these changes in our ecosystems is to engage local communities and be able to articulate how people value these systems and how to manage them in the most effective and ethical way. And I thought that one of the most direct ways to pursue that is through community science and engaging local people in the production of biodiversity data. And so that's what brought me to the California Academy, and I continue to do this work, not only studying Sierra Nevada ecosystems, but also urban ecosystems as well.
Thank you all. Rebecca, and Avery are examples of the many scientists we have here. And so we have our curators, we have undergraduate students and graduate students and postdocs and emeritus professors. And most people who walk through our doors don't know that we're doing all of this research in our basement. And also in that basement are about 46 million objects, one of the largest natural history collections on the planet. And people come from all over the world to study the collection that we have here. And so we're trying to, events like this are a way of highlighting the science that we do here, which is so key to the future. So let's get going. And let me launch you up with an easy question and a hard question, probably all at the same time. And that question is, what do you see as the greatest challenge facing your work? And what do you see as the most likely solution to that challenge, be it in the short term or the long term? And Rebecca Albright, we'll kick off with you.
I think so. As a coral reef biologist, the largest challenge to my work is probably glaringly obvious. It's just that we are losing coral reefs faster than we can regenerate them. The pace of loss is just simply outpacing our ability to retain them or regenerate them. And I think one thing, like a palpable shift in the community that has happened over the last 5 to 10 years has been a real acknowledgement and discussion and awareness around the scalability gap, and then a consequently an infusion of resources into addressing that gap. And I think, we're not quite there yet, but what it has done is directed a lot of funding calls, a lot of efforts, convening networks of people, conferences, people that are really focused on, let's talk about this issue that we're regenerating reefs on the order of hectares. and we're losing them globally. And so we have to deal with this scalability thing. And what has happened is we're starting to bring people from all walks of life, from tech, from business, from automation, into this circle, instead of it just being coral scientists talking about the issue amongst themselves. And that's what we need, is interdisciplinary collaboration in order to tackle this issue and really minimize that gap. So we're starting to see infusion of tech, infusion of automation to remove human bottlenecks, collaboration in ways that we haven't seen. And that's really promising for me. So again, we're not quite there yet, but I think it's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think similar to what Rebecca said, I think one of the biggest challenges is that biodiversity that I study and that I encourage people to study and take pictures of and grow more connected to is under huge threat, right? So it's like it's a real troubling time, right? When you see changes happening so fast. I know all of you have probably observed things change that you used to see when you were younger, or even 5 or 10 years ago, and to see those changes. And so I think that's like a challenge. And at the same time, it's kind of an opportunity, because one of the things that we try to do through our work is bring people out and just like honor that witnessing of change. It's really important that we all take a minute to like really be a part and see the changes that are happening, because they really are happening, and use our power to take a picture and share that and be part of a community, to share that information that we have that might be really, really dear to us, right? Like a flower that you used to see and now you don't see, or a flower that something you haven't seen and now you're seeing it for the first time. Like to share that and to really recognize that as a moment of connection with the natural world, and know that if you share that information on iNaturalist, which is the app and the platform we use for our work, that helps us as scientists have data that can help answer questions and inform policy in places like San Francisco and in the state of California. And those data are critically important for making the right decisions. So it's like this, to me, this is like the best thing about it, right? It's like we're seeing changes, they're really heartbreaking, but if we share what we know, we can lead to better outcomes. So it's like an emotional connection that leads to a science solution.
I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about something that a challenge that might not be obvious kind of outside of the scientific community, because I could certainly talk about policy or the rate of climate change or things like that and its impact on my work. But I think as a early career scientist, something that I see as a real challenge is kind of the lack of incentives for doing a lot of the important community building work that I think needs to happen to make the science more actionable. And what I mean is, as I feel the way I think a lot of academia is structured is you're rewarded for doing fast work and publishing a lot of papers and publishing in big journals and doing these kinds of things. But the really important work of building relationships with partners and doing policy advocacy and things like this, they take a really long time, and there isn't that incentive structure exactly there for a lot of scientists to do this. Not to say that scientists don't. I think people spend a lot of time doing that, but the incentives makes it all that much harder. I think, I guess, opportunities. One of the easy ones off the top of my head is just resources. I mean, funding, opportunities specifically geared towards more long-term funding is important. We kind of go year to year from grant to grant, and that can really disrupt relationships that you build with partners if it's so fast. But I think a more difficult kind of resolution to think about is also thinking about like how do we think more long term, not just in our science but also in how our science is applied, and then how do we acknowledge and really emphasize all the work it takes to build relationships and maintain those relationships, and make sure that we're doing that work.
Thank you all. If you listen to the media and about what the media says about the environment, you hear a lot about climate change. Recently, a lot of negative things about climate change. but it's very clear, and it's something that we all believe in our heart of hearts, that biodiversity loss is equal to climate change and the potential impacts. In fact, I'd go so far as to say if we solved climate change today, if we came up with some carbon-free form of energy, we might even be worse off if we don't address the biodiversity side. And we don't talk enough about it, and we're not thinking enough about the system that's creating these effects. So in all of your respective areas of expertise in your work, biodiversity and climate have overlapping effects. And if you could correct one misconception around biodiversity loss, what would that be? What would be the one thing you'd want the world to know about biodiversity loss? And let's start at the other end this time. Avery, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So I think one thing that's particularly relevant to my work is when we think about biodiversity loss, we typically think about the loss of species or even individuals in an area. But I think that there's so much more that is lost even when a species doesn't disappear or go extinct. And I think that maybe an underappreciated aspect of biodiversity loss is the loss of relationships that can happen as different habitats are impacted in different ways. And, you know, I study trees like the ponderosa pine that, you know, they're all over the place and they're probably not going to go extinct anytime soon. But when we think about them shifting their distributions and not necessarily overlapping with some of the other species that, you know, can live in a ponderosa pine forest, then it's the breakdown of these relationships over time that leads to a decrease in biodiversity. And it's the relationships that really matter. And I think you can think about that in terms of, you know, we're not saving biodiversity if we just keep all the species in a zoo. You know, it's the relationships that the species have with each other that carry a lot of this value. And so when we think about biodiversity loss, it's not just counting up all the species, it's also thinking about the unknowable amounts of relationships that these species have.
Yeah, I think kind of following up on what Avery said, I think, you know, Scott's comparison saying if we solve for climate change right now, biodiversity would still be in trouble. I think the opposite is maybe not true. If we solve for a biodiversity crisis, that would solve a lot of our climate problems. And so like thinking about it that way and how people, like all of us, have probably a stronger connection to nature and like a more tangible relationship to nature than maybe like climate. Like sure, we have connections to weather, but I'm talking about climate, like big long-term changes. And so I think just really flipping it on its head and thinking differently about what matters most and how nature has already, like we already know the solutions to a lot of these problems. And a lot of our climate driven problems are because of the lack of those relationships and nature being intact and being able to function. And I think about some of the things, like one of the things that the team here at the Academy works on is this amazing starfish off the California coast called Pycnopodia. It's a sunflower starfish. And our aquarium is working with a team of people all over California and the world actually to try to raise this starfish in human care because it's almost completely been wiped out from along the California coast because of a warm water blob, which is like a warm water event, which is a climate driven change along our coast that had an immediate impact on this big starfish. And the loss of this starfish led to this huge change off the California coast, thinking about the relationships like Avery was talking about. Like, I don't think anyone really ever thought if we don't have this starfish, we'll lose kelp forests off the Northern California coast. Even though as scientists now, when we look at the trophic, what happens, we're like, of course that was what was going to happen. But we didn't really think about it in that way until the star was gone and it led to this huge change. And so that was like a climate biodiversity interaction. And so it's like so important for us to understand all of those things and make those connections for people. And that's one of the things that we're able to do here at the Academy.
I think my answer is going to kind of reiterate what's already been said, but for the system that I work in, I think the biggest misconception is that biodiversity loss would only be felt in that system and not have any cascading consequences. And as has been pointed out, I mean, for reefs in particular, they cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, but they host almost 30% of biodiversity. So if we lose in the oceans as a whole, so if we lose reefs or lose biodiversity on reefs, that has all these cascading implications, as has been pointed out for other systems. It has human security and food security issues, because reefs support fisheries that are the primary protein for hundreds of millions of people around the world. It supports economic livelihoods. It supports coastal protection and infrastructure. So these cascading consequences of biodiversity loss are felt far beyond reefs themselves.
Thank you all. Scale is a thing that I know I think about a lot, and I think these folks think about a lot. Rebecca, you brought it up in your work, that we can do good things on local scales, but the problem is global. And so how do we take solutions and scale them up rapidly enough to make a difference? And part of the problem is timing, and we don't know the exact timing. And there, people say, well, we have 5 years, we have 10 years, we have 20 years. We know we have a limited amount of time to shift humanity's relationship with the planet and start moving in a different direction. Because at some point, Mother Nature is going to take control of the wheel and start moving us in a direction we do not want to go. So getting to scale is a significant challenge. And I'm wondering if each of you could speak to that, whether it's specifically related to your work or more broadly, and also the important role of collaboration, because we know that we're just one organization. We can only do so much, and we recognize the need to partner with others in order to get to scale. And so would you all talk about that? And maybe Rebecca Johnson, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I think that, the work that I do could not happen with collaboration, right? I mean, period, right? It's just collaborating with people is the first step, right? Is that community science has that in its word, right? In its name, is that it's inherently a collaboration between my team, the few folks who are paid to do this work, and then folks that are out there making and sharing observations. And we take that responsibility really seriously. It's actually part of the core of our team is the responsibility that we have to use the data that we have worked with people to collect, to use it and to use it for good. But some of the other work that I do is also all rooted in collaboration. And one of the events that we run is called the City Nature Challenge. And we'll talk a little bit about this later, but this is a global biodiversity documentation kind of like collaboration / competition. And this is really an event where people all over the world are taking time out to look for and document the species that they find around where they live. And this started in 2016 as a competition between us here in San Francisco at the Cal Academy and our colleagues at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles. So in 2016, it was 2 cities saying who can document the most nature? And this year, which will be the 10th year, there are almost 700 cities all over the world participating in the City Nature Challenge. And now the City Nature Challenge is the largest community science event in the world, focused on things other than just birds. And to be clear, there's amazing bird community science out there. And also it's the largest annual census of biodiversity around the world. And that didn't start because we were we want to create the largest community science event in the world. It started because we had this fun idea, and we've been able to support and grow that by building collaboration with people all over the world and supporting people all over the world and thinking about what does it mean to hold a community science event in Malaysia and Poland and Mexico and California all in the same day, and not telling people how to do it, but giving people the tools so they can do these events in the ways that work best for them and their local communities. And to me, that's the core of all kinds of collaboration, is finding the common denominator and then working with the special things of all of the partners.
Avery?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of ways to complement Rebecca Johnson said, because I think it was pretty comprehensive. I think one thing that Rebecca Johnson and I have been working on has been thinking about ways to make other community science data collection campaigns mission driven and around particular research questions, and make them, scale them in a way kind of like the City Nature Challenge, in a way that they're kind of fun and interactive. And one example is part of my research on the zombie forests in the Sierra Nevada is looking for indicator species, so understory plants or animals that can move a lot faster in response to climate change than the trees can. And what we're doing is we're running some local bioblitzes in the Sierras, but we're hoping to scale it up in a way that we can create kind of an interactive tool that shows our current best knowledge of the best indicator species for changing ecosystems, that updates as more information comes in, and you can actually track your contribution to the further refinement of our understanding of indicator species and vegetation change. So making these kind of campaigns, I think, interactive, mission driven, and reciprocal in a way that you're acknowledging the work that's being put into them by community scientists and giving back information as well instead of more extractive. I think that to me, that's something I'm really hopeful for scaling.
I'll just plus one to everything that has been said, and then I'll also add that when dealing with reefs and with corals, so we here in San Francisco, this may come as a surprise, but we're not proximate to coral reefs. And so we have to collaborate. So corals are protected by what's called CITES, which is the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species. And so at this moment in time, we legally cannot take these corals and plant them back out onto the reef. So what we do here is generate knowledge and ideas and techniques and iterate on that and try to develop strategies around how to bolster and enhance all of the things we care about, which is genetic diversity and growth and survivorship and resilience. And then inherently, we have to partner internationally with organizations and with groups of people who are proximate to coral reefs to port all of that knowledge and techniques to on-the-ground efforts, because we can't do it in our own backyard. So our work has to be very collaborative. And I'm hoping we get a chance to talk about this at some point, but right now we're focusing our efforts in Roatan and Honduras. And we actually in a couple of weeks are flying down there to commission a lab that we've built there based off of our prototypes here to actually do this on the ground regenerative work on the local Honduran reefs and develop more techniques down there. And then that facility will serve as a hub for outreach and education and training and all sorts of other things be above and beyond just regeneration work at its core. So yeah, our work is an incredibly collaborative by nature, and it has to be in order to be successful.
Thank you. Rebecca Johnson, since we've raised the issue of community science, let's just take a moment, talk about it more. You run our center that's where we're driving this community science. Maybe not everybody here understands what it is and how it works. Could you please talk about that, and also how it relates to how we can tie it into the collections work, for example, where we have in our collections specimens of nature that were collected over 100 years ago, right here in the city and various places around the world, from the Galapagos to the Philippines. And if we're going to understand how ecosystems work today, we have to understand what they were like when they were really thriving, because they're not thriving today. And all of that nature can be used for that. And there's community science tied to that. But then we have to understand how these systems are working today before we can think about where they need to go in the future to be really thriving and productive and resilient, especially in the face of climate change. So community science is a really important contributor to this. And I'm wondering if you could speak to it, and then Avery and Rebecca, if you want to add to that, feel free.
Sure. So the kind of community science that we do here asks people everywhere to take pictures, like I've said, of plants and animals or living things or evidence of living things wherever they are. Like that could be, walking here from the bus or the car, like wherever you are. If you see something, if you see a butterfly, if you see a tree that you're not sure what it is, like you can take a picture and share it. And the app that we use is called iNaturalist. And iNaturalist is amazing in many ways. One of the coolest things about it is it has machine learning built in that will identify what you've seen for you, will help you get closer to an identification. So it's an incredible way to learn. If you see a butterfly and you don't know what it is, they'll take a picture. And in the new app that just came out last week, it actually will identify it right away in the picture. Like you don't even have to do anything. It will give you a suggestion. So you can learn about what you saw. But when you upload that photo is marked with the date and time and your location. So that gives the observation all of these critical data: what you saw, where you saw it, when you saw it, who you are. And then it's shared with the world. And iNaturalist is not only a place to learn, but it's a community of people online who care about nature, who help confirm that identification that was made by the machine. So it's not just machine learning, it's humans who are verifying that identification. And right now, I think there have been, I haven't looked lately, but over 150 million observations have been shared on iNaturalist from all over the world. And so this is the largest database of biodiversity in the world. And that's just amazing on its face, right? But that picture that you shared, that core data, who, what, when, where, is the same core data that our collections have. Every single collection, whether it's a plant or a coral or a nudibranch, in our collection has that same bit of data attached to that specimen. And that specimen is critical to understand so many things. Like you can extract DNA from the specimen, you can measure the specimen, you can look at things that people that collected it 100 years ago could never even imagine. So the specimens are critical. And if you mobilize that little bit of data, what species was found where, when, you can compare the past from our collections to the current data from community science. And that allows us to understand change that has already happened. And then we can understand with climate models what the future will look like. And we can help understand what the future for biodiversity might look like by combining those two sources of data. And that's something that my team is doing here in California. We're building tools to be able to do that. That's the thing I just described. Look at the past and look at now and do some forecasts for the future using those two types of data.
Great. Anybody else want to add anything on community science?
I'll just add real quick that I was up late doing some analysis last night that is actually very relevant to this.
What a good scientist.
Yeah, that's me. Drank a lot of coffee today, but I did finish some analysis that showed that we're working on a paper about how the recently digitized California herbarium specimens here at the Cal Academy, showing how herbarium records and iNaturalist records of plants across California can really complement each other, and they both have different strengths and weaknesses. So Rebecca Johnson talked about, in order to kind of learn more about the future, you need to kind of know where you are. You're trying to draw a line to extrapolate to the future. You got to have a point in the present, but also to get the slope of that line, you got to look in the past, and that's where you get that's what you can get from herbarium records. But also, herbarium records are unique in that they're often collected by botanical experts, and we found that in up north in the Marble Mountains, these botanical experts will travel a lot further off the trail to collect herbarium to observe plant species than the average iNaturalist user will. And so, moving forward, there's a lot of synergy between these different data types, and it's really neat that we're able to work with them all here.
All right, let me go to my last question here. So we'll be turning it over to you folks. So be thinking about your questions. Maybe for all of you, and we'll start with Rebecca Albright first. If there were one or two suggestions you could make to non-scientists who want to make a difference in regenerating the natural world, what would those suggestions be?
Sure. I mean, I think the most obvious one probably is just making sustainable, and I'll throw in reef friendly choices in your day-to-day life, and then talking about those choices and generating awareness. And so that might look differently for different people, but some examples I'm sure you've heard about are maybe choosing sustainable sources of seafood, reducing your single-use plastic waste, choosing plant-based diets, lowering your carbon footprint when you think about transportation and things like that, choosing reef-safe sunscreens, all of those things, and then talking about them so that we generate awareness. The other thing, if you really want to make impact with reef regeneration, is there are a lot of organizations that are dependent on community science or volunteers in order to be impactful at scale. And so you can volunteer yourself with those organizations, you can donate to them, and all of those things give real resources to the hands of people that are doing the hard work on the ground.
Well, you can take pictures and share them. You can use iNaturalist, and you have a great opportunity coming up because the City Nature Challenge that I talked about starts on Friday. So Friday the 25th through Monday the 28th is the City Nature Challenge. It's the 10th anniversary. 700 cities all over the world are participating. But for all of us, all of the 9 Bay Area counties, so all of the counties that touch the Bay, if you're anywhere in any of those places over those 4 days and you make iNaturalist observations, those count for the City Nature Challenge. And altogether in California, 35 counties are participating in the City Nature Challenge now this year. And so if you're somewhere else, or if people online are listening from somewhere else, you can make those observations. So you can go online and figure out who's participating in the City Nature Challenge, but really just getting out there and paying attention and noticing nature is always like a great way to help in this cause, because it gives you something like a better and deeper understanding of nature all around you. And if you share that information, it helps all of us scientists and policymakers make better decisions. And so here's a little slide they just put up. So this is just an example. This is our 10th anniversary logo for the City Nature Challenge. And this is just a small subset of the translations of the logo for all of the folks who participate all over the world. So you can go to, there's a website, a City Nature. This is our website here, the Cal Academy's website, where you can find events, because a lot of our partners and we are holding events over these next 4 days. So you can find a list of the probably close to 50 events happening all over the Bay Area this weekend. And there's also another website called citynaturechallenge.org where you can see all of the cities all over the world who are participating. Before I hand it off to Avery, I would just say the one other thing that you all can do is you can write your elected leaders and talk to them about how much you care about nature and public lands, because those things are under threat now. And so writing letters makes a real difference, and sharing your personal connection to nature and why it matters to you is really important right now more than ever.
Great. I completely agree with both Rebecca Albright and Rebecca Johnson said. I'd also like to continue with the kind of relationship motif, the importance of relationships. And I think that, when we think about, I just think it's so important to build important and diverse relationships with your local ecosystems. And that can be taking pictures of the plants and animals around you, learning more about them, but also understanding that people are part of your ecosystems too, and building relationships with other people. Because I think that, when the kind of work that needs to happen to regenerate the natural world is going to take, solidarity, it's going to take communication, it's going to take collaboration, learning science, and this all happens with people working together. And so I think, taking the bus is great, not just because, it's a little more carbon efficient, but also because you see other people on the bus, and maybe you recognize them more, as you take the bus more often. And when you're planting those poppy seeds, someone walking by that saw you on the bus might see you planting them and ask, "Oh, what are you doing?" And then you have a conversation about it. And so relationships with people and ecosystems that we're all part of is so important.
All right, time for questions from all of you. I will run around with a microphone. No problem.
Hi, I'm wondering if you all employ gamification in any way to build off the back of the data to engage with the public.
That's a great question. So we don't, I mean, except that we try to have fun, right? We don't have any like specific gamification. We don't build like apps, really. Like we use iNaturalist as an app. The app Seek, which is part of iNaturalist, has a little gamification with badges and things like that to reward participation. We do some, I guess we have some kind of maybe homespun or a little more crafty kind of gamification. So for the City Nature Challenge this year for our Bay Area participants, like if people make observations of 10 species, like we're going to send them some stickers. If they make observations of 100 species, they might get like something even better. So that's a kind of reward and gamification, but we haven't used, we currently on our team haven't used like technology to gamify finding or doing certain things. Good question.
Hello, thank you for this speech. I'm always appreciate people who decided to dedicate their lives to solving greatest humanity's challenges. I just want to say thank you. And I'm running a startup called Humans, and we're given grants from $100,000 to $250,000 for environmental nonprofits who are solving biodiversity laws, especially planting trees, planting coral reefs, like everything on Earth. So would love to chat with you all. Yeah, and you guys, if you have something in mind. Yeah, so thank you so much. I just want to, giving back as many as I can. Thank you.
Other questions?
First of all, thanks for your work. Just as we've changed, or I guess evolved from the notion of citizen science to a more inclusive notion of community science, I've also struggled with the notion of, what does a native species mean, particularly in an era of climate change. And, I think it's particularly relevant as we think about urban work, but I also think, talking about zombie forests or how are our ecosystems changing, does the notion of a native species mean what it meant? And how do we begin to think about, the resources that, traditionally we put into trying to manage or eradicate non-native species? Our ecosystems have changed just so dramatically. So I'd love to get your sense of what, how you're thinking about the notion of native species, native ecosystems at this point.
I have a paper published in January exactly on this question called Nativeness as a Gradient towards a more complete value assessment of species in a rapidly changing world. And we should totally talk about it. I think that the nativeness concept is the traditional nativeness concept is you run into a lot of contradictions, as you pointed out, with a rapidly changing environment and moving species. And I think there are some important ways that we think about, what it means to belong for a species in different places. And I would be happy to talk to you more about it, but I could get into it, but I'll leave it there.
So I'm going to jump in if I can and talk briefly about this because it's something that I care about very deeply and I'm passionate about. There is something to native species. And let me give you a concrete example that's right outside our window here. Eucalyptus trees, non-native, came from Australia. Eucalyptus trees support about 5 species of insects. California oaks, native to this place, many different kinds, support about 270 species of insects. Difference between 5 and 270. Those insects then form the basis of all the rest of the ecosystem from there on up, in the sense of feeding all these birds and mammals and just keeping the whole ecosystem going. And the reason for that is that they evolved to be here. So these relationships that Avery's been talking about evolve over thousands of years. And if you bring in native species, the insects can't adapt to them. So you might have a landscape that looks beautiful, but ecologically it's desolate. And the native species can be critical. Now, of course, climate's changing, things are changing, things are moving northward. At some point in this century, San Francisco will have a climate more like LA than San Francisco today. So species will be moving northward, et cetera. We're gonna have to deal with all that. And we have to take into account the fact that these relationships co-evolved over long periods, and that's what drives ecosystems to health. All right, other questions? Yes.
Yeah, this is kind of a big picture question I'm going to ask you. because I'm the daughter of a chemical engineer, and it's kind of like when my daughter had. I have a metaphor that I witnessed my husband end his, life ended for him. And she was saying, "Mom, you got to fix this. We don't lose him." And I guess this is my mentality about climate change too. I do run a nonprofit. Some of my own solutions I love to talk to you about, but I'm curious if you believe in what the groups are doing that want to draw the carbon out of the atmosphere to slow down our warming process, because that's very controversial, I know.
Drawdown of carbon from the atmosphere seems like a great idea. There's too much carbon. Let's invent a technology that can pull it down. All of the technologies so far can pull down a smidgen of a smidgen of a smidgen of a smidgen of carbon. They're really not effective. If you want to draw down carbon, the best thing to do is plant nature, and especially native plants, because again, they'll lead to more complex biodiversity, which will pull down more carbon out of the atmosphere. Far better than any technology. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't work on those technologies. There might be breakthroughs, as there has been with solar, etc. But we should be focusing on nature-based solutions that we know exist, rather than depending on technologies for doing things which we really have no clue how to do.
I think the issue is, there are companies that are doing this in Switzerland.
Right.
Climeworks is one, but then the argument is, well, but they use a lot of energy.
Right. They use energy, and they're not very efficient at pulling down carbon yet. They're not even close to doing anything that nature can already do. So right now, it is not the solution we need it to be, and we need solutions now, not 20 years from now. All right. You've had your hand up patiently here.
Yeah, again, I want to ask you, as well as the others. The word regeneration now has been really kind of hijacked by agriculture. And I'm writing a book now actually about regeneration. I use the broad definition like you all do: nature, forest, landscapes, ecosystems, etc. Learning, you're saying processes too, human processes. Just how do you respond to that? Tell us more about regeneration and that argument or those issues.
Okay, I'm going to do this very quick. I'm going to hand you my business card. If you want to reach out to me, you can. So regeneration is being hijacked in the same way that sustainability means so many things. It means almost nothing. And we're going to see more of that because more people are catching on to this idea of regeneration. The way we use it, and it can be used many ways in agriculture, but the way we use it, it's literally restoring ecological health. So if the place that the regeneration is occurring isn't healthier after the intervention that you've done, whatever the heck it is, then it's not regeneration the way we see it. It has to work. And again, it's not about specific species. It's about ecological relationships and a healthier, more productive, more resilient ecosystem. And regenerative agriculture in its truest form actually can augment local biodiversity in addition to providing food. Those are the kinds of solutions we need to look for. But if you'd like to reach out, please do. Other questions?
First of all, thank you everyone at the Cal Academy for your amazing work. I was curious about reimagining SF, if you could talk more about that and maybe the collaborative efforts happening right here in San Francisco.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for asking. So Reimagining San Francisco is an alliance that the Academy kind of kicked off and is now the backbone organization for. So we're kind of supporting the organization. It is made up of 50 nonprofits, agencies, other folks in the city, all of whom are doing amazing work on their own around nature and people's connection to nature. And we brought everyone together to think about, what if we coordinated our work? Like, what could we do together that we're not able to do alone? And so we have started, we want to be a very successful alliance. And this is tricky to have a lot of people across, even though our city is small, but it's, we're still trying to work together and to build a really, really strong foundation so we can do that work together into the future. So we're trying to set up our governance and our structure. We have an amazing manager named Alvaro Casanova, who is leading the Alliance, and we have been trying out these pilot projects across the city. We've done some greening and cleanup at Tenderloin Community School with a number of partners. We most recently have been partnering along the Sunset Dunes to set up some signage and to do some transplanting of dune grasses to start the regeneration of the dunes along the former Great Highway, along the Sunset Dunes. And so we're really thinking, how can we collaborate? And we're testing this out by starting with some small projects. And one of the things that's really great about Reimagining San Francisco is we've been able to come together to collaborate and to think in a kind of like, what strengths do all of our different organizations bring to help solve problems, instead of what sometimes happens in a limited resource environment, instead of competing, right? Like, how can we do things together where we bring the strengths of everyone to one project and then raise the funds and do the good work that needs to happen. And so we're really, really excited about using some of the amazing work of some of our working groups who have worked on data and building data baselines to understand where we are now, so we can measure our progress, to use that as another type of foundation to think of some like really big projects that we can do together. So stay tuned.
All right, we really have time for just one more question. So it has to be, are you sure you've got the right question? There's no pressure, it's just the last big question, but if you're ready.
I'm always ready. Thank you. No, thank you for the work that you're doing. Since business, the private sector is such a big source, I guess, of destroying nature, how much time do you spend talking to businesses and just kind of educating them? Do you spend any time on that?
Yes, we are working to partner with local businesses. They know about Reimagining San Francisco. Several, Salesforce among them, have expressed real interest. So our goal is to bring in the corporate community, especially as we start to rethink San Francisco. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to invite one more because that was quick.
So I have a question about why specifically did you choose coral reef communities as one of the targets, like California and coral reefs, with all of the other environmental locations you could choose? And then kind of the second part to that is, how successful is the transplanting of baby corals into these new coral communities?
I mean, one of the main reasons they are a focal point for us is because they are one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet, and in the oceans. So we focus in this institution on biodiversity. That's why we have the tropical rainforest and the tropical coral reef exhibits. And so working to create awareness and protection and regeneration around those heavily biodiverse ecosystems is a core value of us. In terms of how successful the transplantation is, it TBD at this moment. So we are going down in a few weeks in order to fully commission the facility that we've built in Honduras. And then we're going to have our first coral spawning event where we're actually trialing these transplantations in June with a species of brain coral. We have some reason to believe, based off of other studies that have been done elsewhere, that these efforts are more successful than just allowing wild reproduction to happen, because as these populations break down and become more depauperate, opportunities for natural reproduction and natural fertilization also break down. And so facilitating that process helps the population stay viable. And then there's also reason to believe that bringing those baby corals into controlled conditions where you can offer them in those early vulnerable stages of life optimal conditions and then outplant them back offers resilience. And so there's a study that was released last year that showed that transplanted corals had higher survival rates compared to wild corals. And the mechanism why, we're not sure, but there's reason to believe that it has to do with sheltering them through those early vulnerable stages of life before outplanting them. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So I'm going to wrap here. There's an environmental educator, a fellow by the name of David Orr, who once said that hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. That's how we need to think about hope. We can't just have a seat down here and say, gee, I really hope things get better tomorrow. No, we can't be passive. We have to be active. We have to think about things that we can do individually and collectively at this moment. It's like going into a sporting event, whether it's football or soccer, whatever your sport is. You don't go into the match thinking, gee, I hope I win today. You know, you throw yourself into it. We have to throw ourselves into this problem. The future of the planet, the future of humanity depends on it. And so on days like Earth Day, we remember, but we literally do need to make every day Earth Day. And I'll just add as a special note that today is a special day for me because it's also my birthday. So very nice to appreciate that. So I just want to thank you all very much for coming. Thanks to the people who are online watching, and there's a bunch of those. We're thrilled to host you. I think if you have some additional questions for people up here, they are going to be thrilled to try and answer them. I just want to thank you very much for coming to the California Academy of Sciences, and thank you for supporting us in our effort to regenerate the natural world. Please check out that Regeneration Circle. Think about joining, becoming part of that community so that you can contribute to this moment as well. Thank you all very much. Take care.